We're back, Mark. I'm having fun with this. I'm whooping S today. I'm doing good. It's piano roll. Other than I guess that didn't happen during that, but maybe it's the words. I don't know. 34. The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. The Yankee and the King sold us slaves. Well, what had I better do? Nothing in a hurry. Sure, I must get up a diversion. Anything to employ me while I could think. And while these poor fellows could have a chance to come to life again, there sat Marco, petrified in the act of trying to get the hang of this Miller gun, turned to stone, just in the attitude he was in when my pile driver fell. The toy still gripped in his unconscious fingers. So I took it from him and proposed to explain its mystery. Mystery, a simple little thing that, and yet it was mysterious enough for that race and that age. I never saw such an awkward people with machinery. You see, they were totally unused to it. The Miller gun was a little double-barreled tube of toughened glass with a neat little trick of spring to it, which upon pressure would let a shot escape. But the shot wouldn't hurt anybody. It would only drop into your hand. In the gun were two sizes, wee mustard seed shot and another sort that were several times larger. They were money. The mustard seed shot represented mill raise, the larger one mills. So the gun was a purse, and very handy too. You could pay out money in the dark with it with accuracy, and you could carry it in your mouth or in your vest pocket if you had one. I made them of several sizes, one size so large that it would carry the equivalent of $1. Using shot for money was a good thing for the government. The metal cost nothing, and the money couldn't be counterfeited, for I was the only person in the kingdom who knew how to manage a shot tower. Paying the shot soon came to a common phrase. Yes, and I knew it would still be passing men's lips away down in the 19th century, yet none would suspect how and when it originated. The king joined us about this time. The king joined us about this time, mightily refreshed by his nap, and feeling good. Anything could make me nervous now. I was so uneasy, for our lives were in danger, and so it worried me to take a complacent something in the king's eyes which seemed to indicate that he had been loading himself up for performance of some kind or other.
Yeah, get out. I don't need that.
Confound it. Why must he go and choose such a time as this? I was right, he began, straight off, in the most innocently artful and transparent and lubberly way, to lead up to the subject of agriculture. The cold sweat broke out all over me. I wanted to whisper in his ear, "Man, we are in awful danger. Every moment is worth a principality to get back these men's competence. Don't waste any of this golden time." But of course I couldn't do it. Whisper to him? It would look as if he were conspiring, so I had to sit there and look calm and pleasant while the king stood over dynamite mine and mooned along about his damned onions and things. At first, the tumult of my own thoughts, summoned by the dangerous signal swarming to the rescue from every quarter of my skull, kept up such a hurrah and confusion and fifing and drumming that I couldn't take in a word. But presently, when my mob of gathering plans began to crystallize and fall into position and form line of battle, a sort of order quite ensued, and I caught the boom of the king's batteries, as if out of a remote distance. Were not the best way, methinks, albeit it is not to be denied that authorities differ as concerning this point, some contending that the onion is but an unwholesome berry, when stricken early from the tree. The audience showed signs of life and sought each other's eyes in a surprised and troubled way, while as others do yet maintain with such show of reason that is not of necessity the case, instancing that plumes and others, like cereals, do be always dug in the unripe state. The audience exhibited distinct distress, yes, and also fear. Yet are they clearly wholesome? the more especially when one doth assuage the asperities of their nature by admixture of the tranquilizing juice of the wayward cabbage. The wild light of terror began to glow in those men's eyes, and one of them muttered, "These by errors, every one. God hath surely smitten the mind of this farmer." I was in miserable apprehension. I sat upon thorns. And further instancing the known truth that in the case of animals, the young, which may be called the green fruit of the creature, is the better, all confessing that when a goat is ripe, his fur doth heat and sore in-game his flesh. The which defect, taken in connection with his several ranks of rabbits and fulsome appetites, and godless attitudes of mind, and bilious quality of morals, they rose and went for him, with a fierce shout. The one would betray us, the other is mad. Kill them, kill them. They flung themselves upon us. What joy flamed in the king's eye. He might be lame in agriculture, but this kind of thing was just in his line. He had been fasting long. He was hungry for a fight. He hit the blacksmith a crack under the jaw that lifted him clear off his feet and stretched him flat on his back. St. George for Britain. And he downed the wheelwright. The mason was big, but I laid him out like nothing. The three gathered themselves up and came again, went down again, came again, and kept up repeating this, with native British pluck until they were battered up jellies, ruined with exhaustion, and so blind that they couldn't tell us from each other. And yet they kept right on, hammering away with what might be left in them, hammering each other, for we stepped aside and looked on while they roiled, and struggled and gouged and pounded and bit, with the strict and wordless attention to business of so many bulldogs. We looked on without apprehension, for they were fast getting past the ability to get for help against us, and the arena was far enough from the public road to be safe from intrusion. Well, while they were gradually playing out, it suddenly occurred to me to wonder what had become of Marco. I looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. Oh, but this was ominous. I pulled the king's sleeve, and we glided away, and rushed for the hut. No Marco there. No Phyllis there. They had gone to the road for help, sure. I told the king to give his hills wings, and I would explain later. We made good time across the open ground, and as we darted into the shelter of the wood, I glanced back and saw a mob of excited peasants swarm into view, with Marco and his wife at their head. They were making a world of noise, but that couldn't hurt anybody. The wood was dense, and as soon as we were well into its depth, we could take it to a tree and let them whistle. Ah, but then came another sound. Dogs. Yes, that was quite another matter. It magnified our contract. We must find running water. We tore along at a good gait and soon left the sounds for being behind and modified to a murmur. We struck a stream and darted into it. We waded swiftly down it in the dim forest light for as much as 300 yards, and then came across an oak with a great bough sticking out over the water. We climbed up on this bough and began to work our way along it to the body of the tree. Now we began to hear those sounds more plainly. So the mob had struck our trail. For a while the sounds approached pretty fast, and then for another while they didn't. No doubt the dogs had found the place where we had entered the stream, and were now waltzing up and down the shores trying to pick up the trail again. When we were snugly lodged in the tree and certain with foliage, the king was satisfied, but I was doubtful. I believed we could crawl along a branch and get into the next tree, and I judged it worthwhile to try. We tried it, and made a success of it, though the king slipped at the junction and came near falling to connect. We got comfortable lodgment and satisfactory concealment among the foliage, and then we had nothing to do but listen to the hunt. Presently we heard it coming, and coming on the jump, too. Yes, and down both sides of the stream. Louder, louder. Next minute it swelled swiftly up into a roar of shoutings, barkings, tramplings, and swept up by like a cyclone. I was afraid that the overhanging branch would suggest something to them, said I, but I don't mind the disappointment. Come, my liege, it were well that we make good use of our time. We flank them. Dark is coming on, presently. If we can cross the stream and get a good start and borrow a couple of horses from somebody's pasture to use for a few hours, we shall be safe enough. We started down and got nearly to the lowest limb when we seemed to hear the hunt returning. We stopped to listen. Yes, said I, they're baffled. They've given it up. They're on their way home. We will climb back to our roost again and let them go by. So we climbed back. The king listened a moment and said, They'll still search, I with the sign. We did best to abide. He was right. He knew more about hunting than I did. The noise approached steadily, but not with a rush. The king said, they reasoned we were advantaged by no parlous start of them, and bring on foot as yet no mighty way from where we took the water. Yes, sire, that is about it, I am afraid, though I was hoping better things. The noise drew nearer and nearer, and soon the van was drifting under us, on both sides of the water. A voice called a halt from the other bank and said, and they are so minded, they could get to yon tree by this branch and overhangs, and yet one not touch ground. Ye will do well to send a man up it. Marry, that will do. I was obliged to admire my cuteness in foreseeing this very thing and swapping trees to beat it. But, don't you know, there are some things that can beat smartness and foresight. Awkwardness and stupidity can. The best swordsman in the world doesn't need to fear the second best swordsman in the world. No, the person for him to be afraid of some ignorant antagonist who has never had a sword in his hand before. He doesn't do the thing he ought to do, and so the expert isn't prepared for him. He does the thing he ought not to do, and often it catches the expert out and ends him on the spot. Well, how could I, with all my gifts, make my valuable preparation against a nearsighted, cross-eyed, pudding-headed clown who would aim himself at the wrong tree and hit the right one? And that is what he did. He went for the wrong tree, which was of course the right one by mistake, and up he started. Matters were serious now. We remained still and awaited developments. The peasant spoiled and took his way up. The king raised himself up and stood. He made a leg ready, and when the comer's head arrived in reach of it, there was a dull thud, and down went the man floundering to the ground. There was a wild outbreak of anger below, and the mob swarmed in from all around. And there we were treed, and prisoners. Another man started up. The bridging bough was detected, and a volunteer started up the tree that furnished the bridge. The king ordered me to play horse and keep the bridge. For a while the enemy came thick and fast, but no matter. The head man of each procession always got a buffet, and dislodged him as soon as he came in reach. The king's spirits rose. His joy was limitless. He said that if nothing occurred to mar the prospect, we should have a beautiful night. For on this line of tactics, we could hold the tree against the whole countryside. However, the mob soon came to that conclusion themselves, wherefore they called off the assault and began to debate other plans. They had no weapons, but there were plenty of stones. And stones might answer. We had no objections. A stone might possibly penetrate to us once in a while, but it wasn't very likely. We were all protected by boughs and foliage, and were not visible for any good aiming point. If they would put waste half an hour in stone throwing, the dark would come to our help. We were feeling very well satisfied. We could smile, almost laugh. But if we didn't, which was just as well, for we should have been interrupted. Before the stones had been raging through the leaves and bouncing through the boughs 15 minutes, we began to notice a smell. A couple of sniffs of it was enough of an explanation. It was smoke. Our game was up at last. We recognized that. When smoke invites you, you have to come. They raised their pile of dry brush and damp weeds higher and higher, and when they saw the thick cloud begin to roll up and smother the tree, they broke out in a storm of joy clamorous. I got enough breath to say, "Proceed, my liege, after you's manner." The king gasped. "Follow me down, and then back thyself against one side of the trunk, and leave me the other. Then we will fight. Let each pile his deed according to his own fashion and taste." Then he descended, barking and coughing, and I followed. I struck the ground an instant after him. We sprang to our appointed places, began to give and take with all our might. The powwow and racket were prodigious. It was a tempest of riot and confusion and thick falling blows. Suddenly some horseman tore into the midst of the crowd, and a voice shouted, "Hold, or ye are dead men." How good it sounded! The owner of the voice bore all the marks of a gentleman, picturesque and costly raiment, the aspect of command, a hard countenance with complexion and features marred by dissipation. The mob fell humbly back, like so many spaniels. The gentleman inspected us critically, then said sharply to the peasants, "What are you doing to these people?" "They be madmen, worshipful sir. They have come wandering, we know not whence. And ye know not whence? Do ye pretend ye know them not? Most honored sir, we speak but the truth. They are strangers and unknown to any of this region, and they be the most violent and bloodthirsty madmen that ever— Peace! Ye know not what ye say. They are not mad. Who are ye, and whence are ye? Explain. We are but peaceful strangers, sir, I said, and traveling upon our own concerns. We are from a far country, and unacquainted here. We have proposed no harm, and yet but for your brave interference and protection these people would have killed us. As you have divined, sir, we are not mad, neither are we violent or bloodthirsty. The gentleman turned to his routine. The gentleman turned to his retinue and said calmly, "Lash me these animals to the kennels." The mob vanished in an instant, and after them plunged the horsemen, laying about them with their whips, and pitilessly riding down such as were witless enough to keep the road instead of taking to the bush. Their shrieks and supplications apparently died away in the distance, and soon the horsemen began to straggle back. Meantime the gentleman had been questioning us more closely, but had dug no particulars out of us. We were lavish of recognition of the service he was doing us, but we revealed nothing more than we were friendless strangers from a far country. When the escorts were all returned, the gentleman said to one of his servants, "Bring the led horses and mount these people." "Yes, my lord." We were placed towards the rear among the servants. We traveled pretty fast, and finally drew rein some time after dark at a roadside inn, some 10 or 12 miles from the scene of our troubles. My lord went immediately to his room, after ordering supper, and we saw no more of him. At dawn in the morning we breakfasted and made ready to start. My lord's chief attendant sauntered forward at the moment with indolent grace, and said,
"Enemy soldier incoming."
"Ye have said, ye should continue upon this road, which is our direction likewise. Wherefore my lord the Earl Grip hath given commandment that ye retain the horses and ride, and that certain of us ride with ye a 20 mile to fair towns that ride Cambinet, whenso ye shall be out of apparel." We could do nothing less than express our thanks and accept the offer. We jogged along, 6 in the party, at a moderate and comfortable gait, and in conversation learned that my Lord Grip was a very great personage in his own region, which lay a day's journey beyond Cambinet. We loitered to such a degree that it was near the middle of the forenoon when we entered the market square of the town. We dismounted and left our thanks once more for my lord, and then approached the crowd assembled in the center of the square to see what might be the object of interest. It was a remnant of that old peregrinating band of slaves. So they had been dragging their chains about all the weary time. That poor husband was gone, and also many others, and some few purchases had been added to the gang. The king was not interested and wanted to move along, but I was absorbed and full of pity. I could not take my eyes away from these worn and wasted wrecks of humanity. There they sat grounded upon the ground, silent, uncomplaining, with bowed heads, a pathetic sight, and by hideous contrast a redundant orator was making a speech to another gathering not 30 steps away, in fulsome laudation of glorious British liberties. I was boiling. I had forgotten. I was plebeian. I was remembering I was a man. Cost what it might, I would mount that rostrum and click. The king and I were handcuffed together. Our companions, those servants, had done it. My Lord Grip stood looking on. The king burst out in fury and said, "What meaneth this ill-mannered jest?" My lord merely said to his head miscreant, coolly, "Put up the slaves and sell them." Slaves? The word had a new sound, and how unspeakably awful. The king lifted his menaces and brought them down with a deadly force. But my lord was out of the way when they arrived. A dozen of the rascal servants sprang forward, and in a moment we were helpless, with our hands bound behind us. We so loudly and so earnestly proclaimed ourselves freemen, that we got the interested attention of that liberty-mouthing orator and his patriotic crowd, and they gathered about us and assumed a very determined attitude. The orator said, "If indeed ye are free men, ye have not to fear. The God-given liberties of Britain are about ye for your shield and shelter. Ye shall soon see. Bring forth your proofs." "What proofs?" "Proofs that ye are free men?" I remembered. I came to myself. I said nothing, but the king stormed out. "Thou'rt insane, man. It were better, and more in reason, that this thief and scoundrel here proved we are not free men. You see, he knew his own laws just as better people do often know the laws. By words, not by effects. They take a meaning and get to the very vivid when you come to apply them to yourself. All hands shook their heads and looked disappointed. Some turned away, no longer interested. The orator said, and this time in those tones of business, not to sentiment, "And ye do not know your country's laws. It were time ye learned them. Ye are strangers to us. Ye will not deny that. Ye may be free men, we do not deny that, but also ye may be slaves. The law is clear. It doth not require the claimant to prove you are slaves. It requireth you to prove you are not." I said, "Dear sir, give us only time to send us a starlet, or give us only time to send to the Valley of Holiness." "Peace, good man, these are extraordinary requests, and you may not hope to have them granted. It would cost much time and would unwarrantably inconvenience your master." "Master idiot," stormed the king. "I had no master. I myself in the silence, for God's sake." I got the words out in time to stop the king. We were in trouble enough already. It could not help us any to give these people the notion that we were lunatics. There is no use in stringing out the details. The Earl put us up and sold us at auction. This same infernal law had existed in our South in my own time, more than 1,300 years later, and under it hundreds of free men who could not prove that they were free men had been sold into lifelong slavery without circumstances making any particular impression upon them. But the minute law and the auction block came into my personal experience, a thing which had been merely improper before became suddenly hellish. Well, that's the way we were made. Yes, we were sold at auction, like swine. In a big town, in an active market, we should have brought a good price, but this place was utterly stagnant, and so we sold at a figure which makes me ashamed every time I think of it. The King of England brought $7, and his Prime Minister $9, whereas the king was easily worth $12, and I is easily worth 15. But that is the way things always go, if you force a sale in a dull market. I don't care what the property is, you are going to make a poor business of it, and you can make up your mind to it. If the Earl had the wit enough too. However, there is no occasion for my work and my sympathies up on this account. Let him go. For the present, I took his number, so to speak. The slave dealer bought us both and hitched us unto the long chain of his, and we constituted the rear of his procession. We took up our line of march and passed out of the cabinet at noon, and it soon seemed to me unaccountably strange and odd that the King of England and his chief minister, marching manacled and fettered and yoked in a slave convoy, could move by all manner of idle men and a woman, and under windows where sat the sweet and the lovely, and yet never attract a curious eye, never provoke a single remark. Dear, it only shows that there is nothing diviner about a king than there is about a tramp. After all, he is just a cheap and hollow artificiality when you don't know he is a king. But reveal his quality, and dear me, it takes your very breath away to look at him. I reckon we are all fools. Born so, no doubt. Alright, Chapter 35. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. A pitiful incident. It's a world of surprises, the king brooded. This was natural. What would be brood about, should you say? Why, about the prodigious nature of his fall, of course, from the loftiest place in the world to the lowest, from the most illustrious station in the world to the obscurest, from the grandest vocation among men to the basest. No, I take my oath that the thing that gravelled him most, to start with, was not this, but the price he had fetched. He couldn't seem to get over that $7. Well, it stunned me so, when I first found it out, that I couldn't believe it. It didn't seem natural. But as soon as my mental sight cleared and I got right focus on it, I saw I was mistaken. It was natural. For this reason, a king is a mere artificiality, and so a king's feeling, like the impulses of an automatic doll, are mere artificialities. But as a man, he is a reality, and his feelings as a man are real, not phantoms. It shames the average man to be valued below his own estimate of his worth, and the king certainly wasn't anything more than an average man, if he was up that high. Confound him! He wearied me with arguments to show that in anything like a fair market he would have fetched $25. Sure. A thing which was plainly nonsense and full of the baldest conceit. I wasn't worth it myself, but it was a tender ground for me to argue on. In fact, I had to simply shirk argument and do the diplomatic. Instead, I had to throw conscience aside and brazenly concede that he ought to have brought $25, whereas I was quite well aware that in all the ages the world had never seen a king that was worth half the money, and during the next 13 centuries wouldn't see one that was worth the fourth of it. Yes, he tired me. If he began to talk about the crops, or about the recent weather, or about the condition of politics, or about dogs, or cats, or morals, or theology, no matter what, I sighed, for I knew what was coming. He was going to get out of it as a palliation of that tiresome $7 sale. Wherever we halted, where there was a crowd, he would give me a look which said plainly, "If that thing could be tried over again, now with this kind of folk, you would see a different result." Well, when he was first sold, it secretly tickled me to see him go for $7. But before he was done with the sweating and worrying, I wished he had fetched 100. The thing never got a chance to die, for every day at one place or another possible purchasers looked us over, and as often as any other way, their comment on the king was something like this: "Here's a $2.50 chump with a $30 style. Pity but style was marketable." At last, this sort of remark produced an evil result. Our owner was a practical person, and he perceived that this defect must be mended if he hoped to find a purchaser for the king. So he went to work to take the style out of sacred majesty. I could have given him, the man, some valuable advice, but I didn't. You mustn't volunteer advice to a slave driver unless you want to damage the cause you are arguing for. I had found it a sufficiently difficult job to reduce the king's style to a peasant's style, even when he was willing and anxiously pupil. Now, then, to undertake to reduce the king's style to a slave's style, and by force, go to. It was a stately contract. Never mind the details. It will save me trouble to let you imagine them. I will only remark that at the end of a week there was plenty of evidence at lash and club that fists had done their work well. The king's body was a sight to see and to weep over, but his spirit? Why, it wasn't even phased. Even that dull clod to a slave driver was able to see that there can be such a thing as a slave who will remain a man till he dies, whose bones you can break, but whose manhood you can't. This man found that from the first effort down to his latest he couldn't ever come within reach of the king, but the king was ready to plunge for him, and did it. So he gave up at last and left the king in possession of his style unimpaired. The fact is, the king was a good deal more than a king. He was a man, and when a man is a man, you can't knock it out of him. He had rough time for a month, tramping to and fro in the earth, and suffering. And one Englishman was the most interested in the slavery question by that time. His Grace, the King. Yes, from being the most indifferent, he was become the most interested. He was become the bitterest hater of the institution I had ever heard talk. And so I ventured to ask one question which I had asked years before and had gotten such a sharp answer that I had not thought it prudent to meddle in the matter further. Would he abolish slavery? His answer was as sharp as before, but it was music this time. I shouldn't ever wish to hear pleasanter, though the profanity was not good, being awkwardly but put together and with the crash word almost in the middle instead of at the end, where of course it ought to have been. I was ready and willing to get free now. I hadn't wanted to get free any sooner. No, I couldn't quite say that. I had wanted to, but I had not been willing to take desperate chances, and had always dissuaded the king from them. But now, it was new atmosphere. Liberty would be worth any cost that might be put upon it now. I set upon a plan, and was straightway charmed with it. It would require time, yes, and patience too, a great deal of both. One would invent quicker ways and fully assure them, but none that would be as picturesque as this, none that could be made so dramatic, and so I was not going to give this one up. It might delay us months, but no matter, I would carry it out or break something. Now and then we had an adventure. One night we were overtaken by a snowstorm while still a mile from the village we were making for. Almost instantly we were shut up in a fog. The driving snow was so thick you couldn't see a thing, and we were soon lost. The slave driver lashed us desperately, for he saw ruin before him. But his lashings only made matters worse, for they drove us further from the road and from the likelihood of succor. So we had to stop at last and slump down in the snow where we were. The storm continued toward midnight, then ceased. By this time 2 of our feebler men and 3 of our women were dead, and others past moving and threatening with death. Our master was nearly beside himself. He stirred up the living and made us stand, jump, slap ourselves to restore our circulation, and he helped us well as he could with his whip. Now came a diversion. We heard shrieks and yells, and soon a woman came running crying, and seeing our group, she flung herself into our midst and begged for protection. A mob of people came tearing after her, some with torches, and they said she was a witch who had caused several cows to die by a strange disease, and practiced her arts by help of a devil in the form of a black cat. This poor woman had been stoned until she had hardly looked human. She was so battered and bloody the mob wanted to burn her. Well now, what do you suppose our master did? When we closed around this poor creature to shelter her, he saw his chance. He said, burn her here, or they shouldn't have had her all. Imagine that. They were willing. They fastened her to a post. They brought wood and piled it about her. They applied the torch while she shrieked and pleaded and strained her 2 young daughters to her breast. And our brute, with a heart slowly for business, lashed us into a position about the stake and warmed us into life at commercial value by the same fire which took away the innocent life of that poor harmless mother. That was the sort of master we had. I took his number. That snowstorm cost him 9 of his flock, and he was more brutal to us than ever. After that, for many days together, he was so enraged over his loss. We had adventures all along. One day we ran into a procession, and such a procession all the riffraff of the kingdom seemed to be comprehended in it, and all drunk at that. And the van with a cart with a coffin in it, and on the coffin sat a comely young girl, or about 18, suckling a baby, which she squeezed to her breast in a passion of love every little while, and every little while wiped from its face the tears which her eyes rained down upon it. And always the foolish little smile up at her, happy and content, kneading her breast with that dimpled fat hand which she patted and fondled right over her breaking heart. Men and women, boys and girls, trotted along beside or after the cart, hooting, shouting profane and ribald remarks, singing snatches of foul song, skipping, dancing, a very holiday of hellions, a sickening sight. We had struck a suburb of London outside the walls, and this was a sample of one sort of London society. Our master secured a good place for us near the gallows. A priest was in attendance, and he helped the girl climb up and said comforting words to her, and made the under-sheriff provide a stool for her. Then he stood thereby on the gallows, and for a moment looked down upon the mass of upturned faces at his feet. Then over the solid pavement of heads that stretched away on every side, occupying the vacancies far and near, and then began to tell the story of the case. And there was pity in his voice. How seldom they sound within that ignorant and savage land. I remember every detail of what he said, except the words he said in it, and so I changed it into my own words. Law is intended to mete out justice. Sometimes it fails. This cannot be helped. We can only grieve and be resigned, and pray for the soul of him who falls unfairly by the arm of the law, and that his fellows may be few. A law sends poor young things to death, and it is right, but another law has placed her where she must commit her crimes or starve with her children. and before God that law is responsible for both her crime and her ignominious death. A little while ago, this young thing, this child of 18 years, was as happy a wife and mother as any in England, and her lips were blithe with song, which is the native speech of glad and innocent hearts. Her young husband was as happy as she, for he was doing his whole duty. He worked early and late at his handicraft. His bread was on spread, well and fairly earned. He was prospering. He was furnishing shelter and sustenance for his family. He was adding his mite to the wealth of the nation. By consent of a treacherous law, instant destruction fell upon this holy home and swept it away. That young husband was waylaid and impressed and sent to sea. The wife knew nothing of it. She sought him everywhere. She moved the hardest hearts with the supplications of her tears, the broken eloquence of her despair. Weeks dragged by, she watching, waiting, hoping, her mind going slowly to wreck under the burden of her misery. Little by little, all her small possessions went for food. When she could no longer pay her rent, they turned her out of doors. She begged, while she had strength. When she was starving at last, and her milk fallen, she sold a piece of linen cloth of the value of a fourth part of a cent, thinking to sell it and save her child. But she was seen by the owner of the cloth. She was put in jail and brought to trial. The man testified to the facts. A plea was made for her, and her sorrowful story was told in her behalf. She spoke, too, by permission, and said she did steal the cloth, but that her mind was so disordered of late by trouble that when she was overborne with hunger of all acts, criminal or other, swam meaningless through her brain, as she knew nothing rightly except that she was so hungry. For a moment all were touched, and there was disposition to deal mercifully with her, seeing that she was so young and friendless, and her case so piteous, and the law that robbed her of her support to blame as being the first and only cause of her transgression. But the prosecuting officer replied that whereas these things were all true, and most pitiful as well, still there was much small theft in these days, and mistimed mercy. Here would be a danger so property. Oh my God, is there no property in ruined homes, and orphan babes, and broken hearts that British law holds precious, and so he must require sentence. When the judge put on his back cap, the owner of the stolen linen rose trembling up, his lip quivering, his face as gray as ashes, and when the awful words came, he cried out, "Oh, poor child, I did not know it was death," and fell as a tree falls. When they lifted him up, his reason was gone. Before the sun was set, he had taken his own life. A kindly man, a man whose heart was right. At bottom add this murder to this that, to be now done here, and charge them both where they belong, to the rulers and the bitter laws of Britain. The time has come, my child. Let me pray over thee, not for thee, dear abused poor heart and innocent, but for them that be guilty of thy ruin and death, who need it more. After his prayer, they put the noose around the young girl's neck, and they had great trouble to adjust the knot under his ear, because she was devouring the baby all the time, wildly kissing it and snatching it to her face and her breast, and drenching it with tears, and half moaning, half shrieking all the while, and the baby crowing, and laughing and kicking its feet with delight over what it looks for romp and play. Even the hangman couldn't stand it, but turned away. When all was ready, the priest gently pulled and tugged and forced the child out of the mother's arms and stepped quickly out of her reach. But she clasped her hands and made a wild spring toward him with a shriek. But the rope and the under-sheriff held her short. Then she went on her knees and stretched out her hands and cried, "One more kiss! Oh my God, one more! It is the dying that begs it." She got it. She almost smothered the little thing, and when they got it away again, she cried out, "Oh, my child, my darling, it will die. It has no home. It has no father, no friend, no mother. It has them all," said the good priest. "All these will I be till I die." You should have seen her face then. Gratitude? Lord, what do you want with words to express that? Words are only painted fire. A look is the fire itself. She gave that look and carried it away to the treasury of fire, the treasury of heaven, where all things that are divine belong.
Drops on the way.
Wait.
Got gas inbound. Safe zone relocated. inbound.
Vehicle destroyed. Changing mags.
Your squad is getting you out of here. Stand by. Back in the fight!
Well, I mean, I hope that everything's... It's not breaking. I think it's the main thing. Chapter 36. The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. London, to a slave, was a sufficiently interesting place. It was merely a great big village and mainly mud and thatch. The streets were muddy, crooked, unpaved. The populace was an ever-flocking and drifting swarm of rags and splendors of nodding plumes and shining armor. The king had a palace there. He saw the outside of it. It made him sigh, yes, and swear a little, in poor juvenile 6th century way. We saw knights and grandees whom we knew, but they didn't know us in our rags and dirt and raw welts and bruises, and wouldn't have recognized us if we had hailed them, nor stopped to answer, either it being unlawful to speak with slaves on a chain. Sandy passed within 10 yards of me on a mule, hunting for me, I imagined. But the thing which clean broke my heart was something which happened in front of our old barrack in a square, while we were enduring the spectacle of a man being spoiled to death in oil for counterfeiting pennies. It was the sight of a newsboy, and I couldn't get at him. Still, I had one comfort. Here was proof that Clarence was still alive and banging away. I meant to be with him before long. The thought was full of cheer. I had one little glimpse of another thing one day which gave me a great uplift. It was a wire stretching from housetop to housetop. Telegraph or telephone, sure. I did very much wish I had a little piece of it. It was just what I needed in order to carry out my project of escape. My idea was to get loose some night along with the king, then gag and bind our master, change clothes with him, batter him into the aspect of a stranger, hitch him to the slave chain, assume possession of the property, march to Camelot, and... But you get my idea. You see what a stunning, dramatic surprise I would wind up with at the palace. It was all feasible, if I could only get a hold of a slender piece of iron which I could shape into a lock-pick. It could then unto the lumbering padlock with which 4 chains were fastened, whenever I might choose. But I never had any luck. No such thing ever happened to fall in my way. However, my chance came at last. A gentleman who had come twice before to dicker for me, without result, or indeed any approach to result, came again. I was far from expecting ever to belong to him, for the price asked for me from the time I was first enslaved was exuberant. and always provoked either anger or derision. Yet my master stuck stubbornly to it. $22. He wouldn't bate a cent. The king was greatly admired because of his grand physique, but his kingly style was against him, and he was infallible. Nobody wanted that kind of slave. I considered myself safe from parting from him because of an extravagant price. No, I was not expecting to ever belong to this gentleman whom I have spoken of, but he had something which I expected would belong to me eventually, if he would but visit us often enough. It was a steel thing with a long pin to it, with which his long cloth outside garment was fastened together in front. There were 3 of them. He had disappointed me twice, because he did not come quite close enough to me to make my project entirely safe. But this time I succeeded. I captured the lower class of the 3, and when he missed it, he thought he had lost it on the way. I had a chance to be glad about a minute, then straightway a chance to be sad again. For when the purchase was about to fail as usual, the master suddenly spoke up and said that what would be worded thus, in modern English: "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm tired of supporting these 2 for no good. Give me $22 for this one, and I'll throw the other one in." The king couldn't get his breath. He was in such a fury. He began to choke and gag, and meantime the master and the gentleman moved away discussing. "And ye will keep the offer open. 'Tis open till tomorrow at this hour." "Then I will answer you at that time," said the gentleman, and disappeared, the master following him. I had a time of it to the cool king down, but I managed it. I whispered in his ear, to this effect: "Your grace will go for nothing, but after another fashion, and so shall I. Tonight we shall both be free." Ah, how is that? Was this saying which I have stolen? "I will unlock these locks and cast off these chains tonight. When he comes about 9:30 to inspect us for the night, we will seize him, gag him, badger him, and early in the morning we will march out of this town. Proprietors have this caravan of slaves." That was as far as I went, but the king was charmed and satisfied. That evening we waited patiently for our fellow slave to get to sleep and signify it by the usual sign, for you must not take many chances on those poor fellows if you can avoid it. It is best to keep your own secrets. No doubt they fidgeted only about as usual, but it didn't seem to me. It seemed to me that they were going to be forever getting down to the regular snorting.
Gas is inbound.
As the time dragged on, I got nervously afraid we shouldn't have enough of it left for our needs. So I made several premature attempts and merely delayed things by it, for I couldn't seem to touch padlock there in the dark without starting a rattle out of it, which interrupted somebody's sleep and made him turn over, wake some more of the gang. But finally I did get my last iron off, and was a free man once more. I took a good breath of relief and reached for the king's irons. Too late! In comes the master, with a light in one hand and his heavy walking staff in the other. I snuggled close among the wallow snorers to conceal as nearly as possible that I was naked of irons, and I kept sharp look at him, prepared to spring for my man the moment he should bend over me. But he didn't approach. He stopped, gazed absently toward our dusky mass a minute, evidently thinking about something else, then set down his light, moved musingly toward the door, and before a body could imagine what he was going to do, he was out of the door and had closed it behind him. "Quick," said the king, "fetch him back." Of course, it was a thing to do, and I was up and out in a moment. But dear me, there was no lamps in those days, and it was a dark night. But I glimpsed a dim figure a few steps away. I darted for it, threw myself upon it, and then there was a state of things and lively. We fought and scuffed and struggled, and drew a crowd in no time. They took an immense interest in the fight and encouraged us all they could, and in fact couldn't have been pleasanter or more cordial if it had been their own fight. Then a tremendous row broke out behind us. And as much as half of our earnings left us, with a rush to invest some sympathy in that. Lanterns began to swing in all directions. It was a watch gathering far and near. Presently a halberd fell across my back as a reminder, and I knew what it meant. I was in custody. So was my adversary. We were marched off toward prison, one to each other of the watchmen. Here was disaster. Here was a fine scheme gone to sudden destruction. I tried to imagine what would happen when the master should discover that it was I who had been fighting him, and what would happen if they jailed us together in the general apartment for brawlers and petty lawbreakers, as was the custom, and what might. Just then my antagonist turned his face around in my direction. The freckled light from the watchman's tin lantern fell on it, and by George, he was the wrong man.
You've got a loadout drop inbound.
I'm gonna get this for a minute. Mark, we're gonna sit here and hang out for a second with this cat. It's not my cat. He's using the tire as a water bowl. Thank you, cat. Hopefully we didn't have any mistakes there. I always like reading through it. This is fun. Either way you look at it.
Get your squad to the safe zone. Leave no one behind.
Reloading!
Okay. Chapter 37. An awful predicament. One Connecticut Yankee and Coon out their scores. Getting tired. Sleep? It was impossible. It would naturally have been impossible in that noisome cavern of a jail, with its mangy crowd of drunken, quarrelsome, and song-singing rascallions. But the thing that made me sleep all the more, a thing that not to be dreamed of, was my racking impatience to get out of this place, to find out the whole size of what might have happened yonder in the slave quarters, in consequence of that intolerable miscarriage of mine. It was a long night, but the morning got round at last. I made a full and frank explanation to the court. I said I was a slave, the property of the great Earl Grip, who had arrived just after dark at the Tabard Inn in the village on the other side of the water, and had stopped there overnight, by compulsion, he being taken deadly sick with a strange and sudden disorder. I had been ordered to cross the city in all haste and bring the best physician. I was doing my best. Naturally, I was running with all my might. The night was dark. I ran against this common person here, who seized me by the throat and began to pummel me, although I told him my errand and implored him, for the sake of the great Earl, my master's mortal peril. The common person interrupted and said it was a lie, and was going to explain how I rushed upon him and attacked him without a word. Silence, sirrah, from the court. Take him hence, and give him few stripes, whereby to teach him how to treat the servant of an old man after a different fashion another time. Go. Then the court begged my pardon, and hoped I would not fail to tell his lordship it was in no wise the court's fault that this high-handed thing had happened. I said I would make it all right, and so took my leave. Took it just in time, too. He was starting to ask me why I didn't fetch out these facts the moment I was arrested. I said I would if I had thought of it, which was true, but that I was so battered by that man that all my wit was knocked out of me, and so forth and so on, and got myself away, still mumbling. I didn't wait for breakfast. No grass grew under my feet. I was soon at the slave quarters. Empty. Everybody gone. That is, everybody except one body. The slave's master's. It lay there all battered to pulp, and all about were the evidences of a terrific fight. There was a rude board coffin on a cart at the door, and workmen, assisted by the police, were thinning a road through the gaping crowd in order that they might bring it in. I picked out a man humble enough in life to condescend to talk with one so shabby as I, and got his account of the matter. There were 16 slaves here. They rose against their master, and I can now see how it ended. Yes, how did it begin? There was no witness but the slave.
You're cheating.
They said the slave that was the most valuable
Either
got
trained
free
or
from
cheating.
escaped in some strange way. By magic arts, 'twas thought. By reason that he had no key, and the locks were neither broke nor in any wise injured. When the master discovered his loss, he was mad with despair, and threw himself upon his people with his heavy stick, who resisted and brake his back, and in other and diverse ways that give him hurts and brought him swiftly to his end. This is dreadful. It will go hard with the slaves, no doubt,
We're
upon the
headed to a
trial.
war zone. Get
Mary,
geared up.
the trial is over. Would they be a week? I thank you. And the matter's so simple. They were not the half a quarter of an hour at it. Why, I don't see how they could determine which were the guilty ones in so short a time. Which ones? Indeed, they considered not particulars like to that. They condemned them in a body, which he not the law. Which men say the Romans left behind them here when they went, that if one slave killed his master, all the slaves of that man must die for it. True, I'd forgotten. And when will these die? Belike within a 24 and 20 hours. Albeit some say will wait a pair of days more, if peradventure they may find the missing one meantime. The missing one? It made me feel uncomfortable. Is it likely they will find him? Before the day is spent, yes. They seek him everywhere. They stand at the gates of the town, but certain of the slaves will discover him to them if he cometh, and none can pass out. He will be first examined. Might one see the place where the rest are confined? The outside of it, yes. The inside of it, but ye will not want to see that. To look at the dress reference, for future reference, and that sauntered off. At the first second-hand clothing shop I came to, up a back street. I got a rough rig suitable for a common seaman who might be going to cold voyages, and bound up my face with a little bandage, saying I had a toothache. This concealed my worst bruises. Full transformation. I no longer resembled my former self. Then I struck out for that wire, found it, and followed it to its end. It was a little room over a butcher shop, which meant that business wasn't very brisk in the telegraphic line. The young chap in charge was drowsing at his table. I locked the door and put the basket key in my bosom. This alarmed the young fellow, and he was going to make a noise. But I said, "Save your wind. If you open your mouth, you are dead, sure. Tackle your instrument. Lively now. Call Camelot." This doth amaze me. How should such as you know aught of such matters as? Call Camelot. I am a desperate man. Call Camelot, or get away from the instrument, and I will do it myself. What, you? Yes, certainly. Stop gabbling. Call the palace. He made the call. Now then, call Clarence. Clarence who? Never mind Clarence who. Say you want Clarence. You'll get an answer. He did so. We waited 5 nerve-straining minutes, 10 minutes. How long did it seem? And then came a click that was as familiar to me as human voice, for Clarence had been my own pupil. Now, my lad, vacate. They would have known my touch, maybe, and so your call was yours. But I'm all right now. He vacated the place and cocked his ear to listen, but it didn't win. I used a cipher. I didn't waste any time in sociabilities with Clarence, but squared away for business, straight off, thus. The king is here and in danger. We were captured and brought here as slaves. We should not be able to prove our identity, and the fact is I am not in a position to try. Send a telegram for the palace here which will carry a conviction with it. His answer came straight back. They don't know anything about the telegraph. They haven't had any experience yet. The line to London is so new. Better not venture that. They might hang you. Think up something else.
Hostile UAV in
Might
the
hang
area.
us? Little he knew how closely he was crowding the facts.
Capture and secure
I
the
couldn't think
intel
of anything
point.
for the
Cover
moment.
the next gas
Then an idea struck me and I started it along. Send 500 picked knights with Lancelot in the lead, and send them on the jump. Let them enter by the southwest gate and look out for the man with the white cloth around his right arm. The answer was prompt. They shall start in half an hour. All right, Clarence. Now tell this lad here that I'm afraid of yours and a deadhead, and that he must be discreet and say nothing about this visit of mine.
The squad mates started securing
The instrument
intel.
began to talk to the
Join
youth,
them
and I
to
hurried
increase
away.
the speed of the capture.
I fell to ciphering. In half an hour it would be 9 o'clock. Knights and horses in heavy armor couldn't travel very fast. These would make the best time they could, and now that the ground was in good condition, and no snow or mud, they would probably make a 7-mile gait. They would have to change horses a couple times. They would arrive about 6, or a little after. It would still be plenty light enough.
Check your map for the next
They would see
gas
the white
point.
cloth which I should tie around my right arm, and I would take command. We would surround that prison and have the king out in no time. It would be showy and picturesque enough, all things considered, though I would have preferred Moon Day, on account of the more theatrical aspect the thing would I have. Now then, in order to increase the strings to my bow, I thought I would look up some of these people whom I had formerly recognized, and make myself known. That would help us out of our scrape, without the knights. But I must proceed cautiously, for it was a risky business. I must get into sumptuous raiment, and it wouldn't do to run and jump into it. No, I must work up to by degrees, buying suit after suit of clothes, in shops wide apart, and getting a little finer article with each change, until I should finally reach silk and velvet, and be ready for my project. So I started. But the scheme fell through like scat. The first corner turned, and I came plump upon one of our slaves, snooping around with a watchman. I coughed at the moment, and he gave me a sudden look that bit right into my marrow. I judge he thought he had heard that cough before. I turned immediately into a shop and worked along down the counter, pricing things and watching out of the corner of my eye. Those people had stopped and were talking together and looking in the door. I made up my mind to get out the back way, if there was a back way, and I asked the shopwoman if I could step out there and look for an escaped slave, who was believed to be in hiding back there somewhere, and said I was an officer in disguise, and my pard was yonder at the door with one of the murderers in charge, and would she be good enough to step there and tell him he needn't wait, but had better go at once to the further end of the back alley and be ready to heave him off when I rousted him up. She was blazing with eagerness to see one of those already celebrated murderers, and she started on the errand at once. I slipped out the back way, locked the door behind me, put the key in my pocket, and started off, chuckling to myself and comfortable. Well, I had gone and spoiled it again, made another mistake, a double one in fact. There were plenty of ways to get rid of that officer by some simple and plausible device, but no. I must pick out a picturesque one. It is the crying defect of my character, and then I had ordered my procedure upon what the officer, being human, would naturally do. Whereas, when you are at least expecting it, a man will now and then go and do the very thing which it's not natural for him to do. The natural thing for the officer to do, in this case, was to follow straight on my heels. He would find a stout oaken door, securely locked between him and me, before he could break it down. I should be far away, and engaged in slipping into a succession of baffling disguises, which would soon get me into a sort of raiment, which was a surer protection from meddling law dogs in Britain than any amount of mere innocence and purity of character. But instead of doing the natural thing, the officer took me at my word, and followed my instructions, and so, as I came trotting out of that cul-de-sac, full of satisfaction with my own cleverness, he turned the corner, and I walked right into his handcuffs. If I had known it was a cul-de-sac, however, there isn't any excusing a blunder like that. Let it go. Charged up to profit and loss. Of course I was indignant and swore I had just come ashore from a long voyage, and all that sort of thing, just to see you know, if it would deceive that slave, but it didn't. He knew me. And then I reproached him for betraying me. He was more surprised than hurt. He stretched his eyes wide and said, "What wouldst have me let thee, of all men, escape or not hang with us, when thou'rt the very cause of our hanging? Go to." Go to was their way of saying I should smile, or I like that. Queer talkers, those people. Well, there was a sort of bastard justice in his view of the case, and so I dropped the matter. When you can't cure a disaster by argument, what is the use to argue? It isn't my way, so I only said, "You are not going to be hanged. None of us are." Both men laughed, and the slave said, "Ye have not ranked us a fool before. You might better keep your reputation, seeing the strain would not be for long." "It will stand it, I reckon. Before tomorrow we shall be out of prison, and free to go where we will besides." The witty officer lifted at his left ear with his thumb, made a raspy noise in his throat, and said, "Out of a prison, yes, ye say true, and free likewise to go where ye will. So ye wander not out of his grace, the devil's sultry realm." I kept my temper and said indifferently, "Now I suppose you really think we are going to hang within a day or two?" I thought it not many minutes ago, for so the thing was decided and proclaimed. "Ah, then you've changed your mind, is that it?" Even that, I only thought then, I know now. I felt sarcastical, so I said, "Oh, sapient servants of the law, condescend to tell us, then, what you know." that ye will all be hanged today at mid-afternoon. Aho, that shot hit home. Lean upon me. The fact is, I did need to lean upon somebody. My knights couldn't arrive in time. They would be as much as 3 hours too late. Nothing in the world could save the King of England, nor me, which was more important. More important, not merely to me, but to the nation, the only nation on earth standing ready to blossom in its civilization. I was sick. I said no more. There wasn't anything to say. I knew what the men meant. That if the missing slave was found, the postponement would be revoked. The execution take place today. Well, the missing slave was found.
Loadout drop headed your way.
Enemy spotted.
One. One.
Gas is inbound. Marking new safe zone.
Chapter 38, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Sir Lancelot and Knights to the rescue. Nearing 4 in the afternoon, the scene was just outside the walls of London. A cool, comfortable, superb day with a brilliant sun. The kind of day to make one want to live, not die. The multitude was prodigious and far-reaching, and yet we 15 poor devils hadn't a friend in it. There was something painful in that thought. Look at it how you might. There we sat on our tall scaffold, the butt of the hate and mockery of all those enemies. We were being made a holiday spectacle. They had built a sort of grandstand for the nobility and gentry, and these were there in full force with their ladies. We recognized a good many of them.
Success means redeployment.
The crowd got a brief and unexpected dash of diversion out of the king. The moment we were freed of our bonds, he sprang up, in his fantastic rags, with face bruised out of all recognition, and proclaimed himself Arthur, King of Britain, and denounced the awful penalties of treason upon every soul barefoot ere his sacred heads were touched. It startled and surprised him to hear them break into a vast roar of laughter. It wounded his dignity, and he locked himself up in silence. Then, although the crowd begged him to go on, and tried to provoke it by catcalls, jeers, and shouts of, "Let him speak." The king, his humble subjects hunger and thirst for words of wisdom out of the mouth of their master, his serene and sacred dragonness. But it went for nothing. He put on all his majesty and sat under this rain of contempt and insult unmoved. He certainly was great in his way. Absently I had taken off my white bandage and wound it about my right arm. When the crowd noticed this, they began upon me. They said, "Doubtless this sailor man, in his minister, observed his costly badge of office." I let them go on until they got tired, and then I said, "Yes, I'm his minister, the boss, and tomorrow you will hear that from Camelot, which I go not farther." They drowned me out with joyous derision. But presently there was silence, for the sheriffs of London, in their official robes, with their subordinates, began to make a stir which indicated that business was about to begin. In the hush which followed, our crime was recited, the death warrant read, then everybody uncovered while our priest uttered a prayer. Then a slave was blindfolded, the hangman unslung his rope. There lay the smooth road below us, we upon one side of it, the banked multitude wailing its other side. A good clear road, and kept free by the police. How good it would be to see my 500 horsemen come tearing down it. But no, it was out of the possibilities. I followed its receding thread out into its distance, not a horseman on it, or a sign of one. There was a jerk, and the slave hung dangling and hideously squirming, for his limbs were not tied. A second rope was unslung. In a moment another slave was dangling. In a minute a third slave was struggling in the air. It was dreadful. I turned away my head a moment, and when I turned back I missed the king. They were blindfolding him. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I was choking. My tongue was petrified. They finished blindfolding him. They led him under the rope. I couldn't shake off that clinging impotence. But when I saw them put the noose around his neck, then everything let go in me, and I made a spring to the rescue. And as I made it, I shot one more glance abroad. By George! Here they came, a-tilling, 500 mailed and belted knights on bicycles. the grandest sights that ever was seen. Lord, how the plumes streamed, how the sun flamed and flashed from the endless procession of webby wheels. I waved my right arm as Lancelot swept in. He recognized my rag. I tore away my noose and bandage and shouted, "On your knees, every rascal of you, and salute the king. Who fails shall sup in hell tonight." I always use that high style when I'm climaxing in effect. Well, it was ennobled to see Lancelot and the boys swarm up under the scaffold and heave sheriffs and such overboard, and it was fine to see that astonishing multitude go down on their knees and beg their lives of the king they had just been deriding and insulting. And as he stood apart there receiving his homage in rags, I thought to myself, well, really there is something peculiar grand about that gait and bearing of a king, after all. I was immensely satisfied. Take the whole situation all around, it was one of the gaudiest effects I ever instigated. And presently up comes Clarence, his own self, and leaps and says very modernly, "Good deal of a surprise, wasn't it? I knew you'd like it. I've had the boys practicing this a long time, privately, and just hungry for a chance to show off." Okay, chapter 39. The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. The Yankee fights with the knife. Home again at Camelot. A morning or two later I found the paper, damp from the press, by my plate at the breakfast table. I turned to the advertising columns, knowing I should find something interesting. There.
Oh, dude!
De par le Roy. Note that the great lord and illustrious the Sagamore lay Xerius, having condescended to meet the king minister, hang Morgan, the which is surnamed the boss, for satisfaction of offences anciently given. These will engage in the list by Camelot about the 4th hour of the morning of the 16th day of this next succeeding month. The battle will be Loutrance, said the said offence was of a deadly sort, admitting of no common position. De par le Roy. Clarence's editorial reference to this affair was to this effect. It will be observed by a glance at our advertising columns that the community is to be favored with a treat of unusual interest in the tournament line. The names of the artists are warned. Of good entertainment. The box office will be open at noon on the 13th. Admission 3 cents reserved, seats 5. Proceeds to go to the hospital fund. The royal pair and all the court will be present. With these exceptions and the press and the clergy, the free list is strictly suspended. Parties are hereby warned against buying tickets of speculators. They will not be good at the door. Everybody knows and likes the boss. Everybody knows and likes Sir Rag, the spacing. Let us give the lads a good send-off. Remember, the proceeds go to a great and free charity, and one whose broad benevolence stretches out its helping hand, warm with the blood of a loving heart, to all that suffer regardless of race, creed, condition, or color. The only charity established on the earth which has no political or religious stopcock on its compassion, but says here flows the stream, let all come and drink. Turn out all hands, fetch along your doughnuts and your gumdrops, and have a good time. Pie for sale on the grounds and rocks to crack it with, and circus lemonade. 3 drops of lime juice to a barrel of water. This is the first tournament under the new law, which allows each combatant to use any weapon he may prefer. You want to make a note of that? Up to the day set, there was no talk in all Britain of anything but this combat. All the topics sank into insignificance and passed out of men's thoughts and interest. It was not because the tournament was a great matter. It was not because Sir Sagamore had found the Holy Grail, for he had not, but he had failed. It was not because the second official personage in the kingdom was one of the duelists. No, all these features were commonplace.
We'll take a 5-minute break.
Yet there was abundant reason for the extraordinary interest which this coming fight was creating. It was born of the fact that all the nation knew this was not to be a duel between mere men, so to speak, but a duel between two mighty magicians. A duel not of muscle but of mind, not of human skill but of superhuman art and craft. A final struggle for supremacy between two master enchanters of the age. It was realized that the most prodigious achievements of the most renowned knights could not be worthy of comparison with a spectacle like this. They could be but child's play, contrasted with this mysterious and awful battle of the gods. Yes, all the world knew it was going to be in reality a duel between Merlin and me, a measuring of his magic powers against mine. It was known that Merlin had been busy whole days and nights together, imbuing Sir Sagramour's arms and armor with supernal powers of offense and defense, and that he had procured for him from the spirits of the air a fleecy veil, which would render the wearer invisible to his antagonists, while still visible to other men. Against Sir Sagramour, so weaponed and protected, 1,000 knights could accomplish nothing. Against him no known enchantments could prevail. These facts were sure. Regarding them there was no doubt, no reason for doubt. There was but one question. Might there be still other enchantments, unknown to Merlin, which could render Sir Sagramour's veil transparent to me, and make his enchanted mail vulnerable to my weapons? This was one thing to be decided in the list. Until then the world must remain in suspense. So the world thought there was a vast matter at stake. And the world was right, but it was not the only they had in their minds. No, a far vaster one was upon the cast of this die, the life of knight errantry. I was a champion, it was true, but not the champion of the frivolous black arts. I was a champion of hard, unsentimental common sense and reason. I was entering the list to either destroy knight errantry or be its victim. Vast as the showgrounds were, there was no vacant spaces in them outside of the list. At 10 o'clock on the morning of the 16th, the mammoth grandstand was clothed in flags, streamers, and rich tapestries, and packed with several acres of small fry tributary kings, their suits, and the British aristocracy with our own royal gang in the chief place, and each and every individual a flashing prism of gaudy silks and velvets. Well, I never saw anything to begin with it but a fight between an upper Mississippi sunset and the aurora borealis. The huge camp of beflagged and gay-colored tents at one end of the list, with a stiff standing sentinel at every door, and a shining shield hanging by him for challenge, was another fine sight. You see, every knight was there who had any ambition or any caste feeling, for my feeling toward their order was not much of a secret, and so here was their chance. If I won my fight with Sir Sagramour, others would have the right to call me out as long as I might be willing to respond. Down at our end there was but 2 tents, one for me and another for my servants. At the appointed hour the king made a sign, and the heralds in their tabards appeared and made proclamation, naming the combatants and stating the case of quarrel. There was a pause, then a ringing bugle blast, which was a signal for us to come forth. All the multitude caught their breath, and an eager curiosity flashed into every face. Out from his tent rode great Sir Sagramore, an imposing tower of iron, stately and rigged, his huge spear standing upright in its socket, and grasped in a strong hand his grand horse's face and breast, cased and still, his body clothed in rich trappings that almost dragged the ground. Oh, a most noble picture. A great shout went up of welcome admiration. They're trying to look for the future. I've never read it. And then out I came, but I didn't get any shouts. There was a wondering, eloquent silence for a moment, and then a great wave of laughter began to sweep along that human sea, but a warning bugle blast cut its career short. I was in the simplest and comfortablest of gymnast costumes, flesh-colored tights from neck to heel, with blue silk puffings about my loins, and bare-headed. My horse was not above medium size, but he was alert, slender-limbed, muscled with watch springs, and just a greyhound to go. He was a beauty, glossy as silk, and naked as he was, beautiful, except for a rifle, ranger saddle. The iron tower and the gorgeous bedquilt came cumbrously but gracefully, pirouetting down the list, and we tripped lightly up to meet them. We halted. The tower saluted. I responded. Then we wheeled and rode side by side to the grandstand and faced our king and queen, to whom we made obeisance. The queen exclaimed, "Alack, Sir Boss, wilt fight naked and without lance or sword, or—" But the king checked her and made her understand, with a polite phrase or two, that this was none of her business. The bugles rang again, and we separated and rode to the ends of the list, and took position. Now old Merlin stepped into view and cast dainty web of gossamer threads over Sir Sagramore, which turned him into Hamlet's ghost. The king made a sign, the bugles blew, Sir Sagramore laid his great lance in rest, and the next moment here he came, thundering down the course with his veil flying out behind, and I went whistling through the air like an arrow to meet him, cocking my ear for the while, as if noting the invisible knight's position and progress by hearing, not sight. A chorus of encouraging shouts burst out for him, and one brave voice flung out a heartening word for me. Said, "Go it, Slim Jim." It was an even bet that Clarence had secured the favor for me, and furnished the language too. When that formidable lance point was within a yard and a half of my breast, I twitched my horse aside without an effort, and the big knight swept by, scoring a blanket. I got plenty of applause that time. We turned, braced up, and down we came again. Another blank for the knight, a roar of applause for me. This same thing was repeated once more, and it fetched some whirlwind of applause, that Sir Sagramore lost his temper, and at once changed his tactics and set himself the task of chasing me down. Why, he hadn't any show in the world at that. It was a game of tag, with all the advantage on my side. I whirled out of his path with ease whenever I chose, and once I slapped him on the back as I went to the rear. Finally, I took the chase into my own hands, and after that, turn or twist, or do what he would, he was never able to get behind me again. He found himself always in front at the end of his maneuver, so he gave up that business and retired to his end of the list. His temper was clear gone now, and he forgot himself and flung an insult at me which disposed of mine. I slipped my lasso from the horn of my saddle and grasped the coil in my right hand. This time you should have seen him come. It was a business trip, sure. By his gait there was blood in his eye. I was sitting my horse at ease, and swinging the great loop of my lasso in wide circles about my head. The moment he was underway, I started for him. When the space between us had narrowed 40 feet, I spent the snaky spirals of the tone leaping through the air, then darted aside and faced about and brought my trained animal to a halt with all his feet braced under him for a surge. The next moment the rope sprang taut and yanked Sir Sagramore out of the saddle. Great Scott, but there was a sensation. Unquestionably, the popular thing in the world is novelty. These people had never seen anything of that cowboy business before, and it carried them clear off their feet with delight. From all around and every way the shout went up. Encore, encore. I wondered where they got the word, but there was no time to cipher on philological matters, because the whole knight errantry high was just humming now, and
Okay,
my
you got
prospect
life.
for trade couldn't have been better. The moment my lasso was released and Sir Sagamore had been assisted to his tent, I hauled in the slack, took my station, and began to swing my loop around my head again. I was sure to have use for it as soon as they could elect a successor for Sir Sagamore.
Yeah.
That couldn't take long, where there were so many hungry candidates. Indeed, they elected one straight off. Sir Hervis de Rebel.
Yeah.
Zzz. Here he came, like a house fire. I dodged, he passed like a flash with my horsehair coils settling around his neck. A second or so later, his saddle was empty. I got another encore, and another, and still another. When I had snaked 5 men out and things began to look serious to the ironclads, and they stopped and consulted together, as a result, they decided that it was time to waive evidence and send their greatest and best against me. To the astonishment of that little world, I lassoed Sir Lamorak de Gallus, and after him Sir Galahad. So you see, there was simply nothing to be done now, but play their right bower, bring out the superbest of the superb, the mightiest of the mighty, the great Sir Lancelot himself. A proud moment for me? I should think so. Yonder was Arthur, King of Britain. Yonder was
Go ahead, keep it
Ginevra.
up.
Yes, and wild tribes of little provincial kings and kinglets. And in the tented camp yonder, renowned knights from many lands. And likewise the selectest body known to chivalry, the knights of the Table Round, the most illustrious in Christendom. The biggest fact of all, the very sun of the shining system was yonder couching.
Get him out.
The vocal point of 40,000 adoring eyes, and all by myself. Here was I lying for him. Across my mind flitted the dear image of a certain hello girl of West Hartford, and I wished she could see me now. In that moment down came the invincible. With the rush of a whirlwind, the crowdly world rose to its feet and bent forward.
What's that?
The fateful
What?
coils went circling through the air, and before you could think I was towing Sir Lancelot across the field on his back, and kissing my hand to the storm of waving kerchiefs and the thundering crash of applause that greeted me. Said I to myself as I coiled my lariats and hung it on my saddle horn, sat there drunk with glory. The victory is perfect. No other will venture against me. Knight errantry is dead. Now imagine my astonishment, and everybody else's too, to hear the peculiar bugle call which announces that another competitor is about to enter the list. There was a mystery here. I couldn't account for this thing. Next, I noticed Merlin riding away from me. And then I noticed that my lasso was gone. The old sleight-of-hand expert had stolen it, sure, and slipped it under his robe. The bugle blew again. I looked, and down came Sagamore riding again, with his dust brushed off and his veil nicely rearranged. I trotted up to meet him and pretended to find him by the sound of his horse's hoofs. He said, "Thou art quick of ear, but it will not save thee from this." And he touched the hilt of his great sword, and ye are not able to see it, because of the influence of the veil. Know that it is no cumbrous lance, but a sword, and I ween ye will not be able to avoid it. His visor was up. There was death in his smile. I should never be able to dodge his sword. That was plain. Somebody was going to die this time. If he got the drop on me, I could name the corpse. We rode forward together and saluted the royalties. This time the king was disturbed. He said, "Where is thy strange weapon?" "It is stolen, sire." "Hast another at hand?" "No, sire, I brought only the one." Then Merlin mixed in. "He brought but the one because it was but the one to bring. There exists none other but the one. It belongeth to the king of the demons of the sea. This man is a pretender, and ignorant, else he had known that this weapon can be used in but 8 bouts only, and then it vanisheth away to his home under the sea. Then is he weaponless," said the king. "Sir Sagamore, ye will grant him leave tomorrow." "And I will lend, sir," said Sir Lancelot, limping up. "He is as a brave knight of his hand as any that be on live, and he shall have mine." He put his hand on his sword to draw it, but Sir Sagamore said, "Stay, it may not be. He shall fight with his own weapons. It was his privilege to choose them and bring them. If he has his errand on his head, be it. Knight, said the king, thou art overwrought with passion, it disorders thy mind. Wouldst kill a naked man? And he do it, he shall answer it me, said Sir Launcelot. I will answer it any he that desireth, retorted Sir Sagramore hotly. Merlin broke in, rubbing his hands and smiling his low down smile of malicious gratification. "'Tis well said, right well said, and 'tis enough of purlaying. Let my lord the king deliver the battle signal." The king had to yield. The bugle made proclamation, and we turned apart and rode to our stations. There we stood 100 yards apart, facing each other, rigid and motionless like horse statues. And so we remained in a soundless hush, as much as a full minute, everybody gazing, nobody stirring. It seemed as if the king could not take heart to give the signal. But at last he lifted his hand, the clear note of the bugle followed. Sir Sagramore's long blade described a flashing curve in the air, and it was superb to see him come. I sat still. On he came. I did not move. People got so excited that they shouted to me, "Fly, fly, save thyself, this is murder!" I never budged so much as an inch till the thundering apparition had got within 15 paces of me. Then I snatched a dragoon revolver out of my holster. There was a flash and a roar, and the revolver was back in the holster before anybody could tell what it was. Here was a riderless horse plunging by, and yonder lay Sir Sagramore, stone dead. The people that ran to him were stricken dumb to find that the life was actually gone out of the man, and no reason for it visible. No hurt upon his body, nothing like a wound. There was a hole through the breast of his chainmail, but they attached no importance to a little thing like that. And as a bullet wound there produces but little blood, none came in sight because of the clothing, the swaddling, and the armor. The body was dragged over to let the king and the swells look upon it. They were stupefied with astonishment, naturally. I was requested to come and explain the miracle, but I remained in my tracks like a statue and said, "If it is a command, I will come, but my lord the king knows that I am where the laws of combat require me to remain while any desire to come against me." I waited. Nobody challenged, and I said, "If there are any who doubt that this field is well and fairly won, I do not wait for them to challenge me. I challenge them." "It is a gallant offer," said the king, "and well beseems you. Whom will you name first?" "I name none. I challenge all. Here I stand, and dare the chivalry of England to come against me. Not by individuals, but in mass." "What?" shouted a score of knights. "You have heard the challenge. Take it, or I proclaim you recreant knights and vanquish everyone." It was a bluff, you know. At such a time, it is a sound judgment to put on a bold face and play your hand for 100 times what it is worth. 49 times out of 50 nobody dares to call, and you rake in the chips. But just this once, well, things looked squally. In just no time, 500 knights scrambled into the saddles, and before you could wink a widely scattering drove, were under way and clattering down upon me. I snatched both revolvers from the holster and began to measure distances and calculate chances. Bang! One saddle empty. Bang! Another one. Bang! Bang! And I bagged two. Well, it was a nip and tuck with us, and I knew it. If I spent the 11th shot without convincing these people, the 12th man would kill it. Sure. And so I never did feel so happy as I did when my knight was down his man and I detected the wavering in the crowd with monetary panic. An instant loss now could knock out my last chance, but I didn't lose it. I raised both revolvers and pointed them. The halted host stood the ground just about any good square moment, then broke and fled. The day was mine. Knight errantry was a doomed institution. The march of civilization was begun. How did I feel? Ah, you never could imagine it. And Bree, Merlin, his stock was flat again. Somehow every time the magic of full day roll tried conclusion with the magic of science, the magic of full day roll got left. Chapter 40, 3 years later. When I broke the back of knight errantry that time, I no longer felt obliged to work in secret. So the very next day, I exposed my hidden tools, my mines, and my vast system of clandestine factories and workshops to an astonished world. That is to say, I exposed the 19th century to the inspections of the six. Well, it is always a good plan to follow up an advantage promptly. The knights were temporarily down, but if I would keep them, so I must just simply paralyze them. Nothing short of that would answer. You see, I was bluffing. That last time in the field, it would be natural for them to work around to that conclusion if I gave them a chance. So I must not give them the time, and I didn't. I renewed my challenge, engraved it on brass, posted up where my priest could read it to them, and also kept it standing in the advertising columns of the paper. I not only renewed it, but added to its proportions. I said, name the day and I will take 50 assistants and stand up against the massed chivalry of the whole earth and destroy it. I was not bluffing this time. I meant what I said. I could do what I promised. There wasn't any way to misunderstand the language of that challenge. Even the dullest of that chivalry perceived that this was a plain case of put up or shut up. They were wise and did the latter. In all the next 3 years, they gave me no trouble worth mentioning. Consider 3 years sped. Now look around on England, a happy and prosperous country, and strangely altered. Schools everywhere, and several colleges, a number of pretty good newspapers. Even authorship was taking a start. Sir Dindon the humorist was first in the field with a volume of gray-headed jokes, which I had been familiar with during 13th century. If he had left out that cold, rancid one about the sex shirt, I wouldn't have said anything, but I couldn't stand that one. I suppressed the book and hanged the author. Slavery was dead and gone. All men were equal before the law. Taxation had been equalized. The telegraph, the telephone, the phonograph, the typewriter, the sewing machine, and all the thousand willing and handy servants of steam and electricity were working their way into favor. We had a steamboat or two on the Thames. We had steam warships and the beginnings of a steam commercial marine. I was getting ready to send an expedition to discover America. We were building several lines of railway, and our line from Camelot to London was already finished and in operation. I was shrewd enough to make all offices connected with the passenger service places of high and distinguished honor. My idea was to attract the chivalry and nobility and make them useful to keep them out of mischief. The plan worked very well. The competition for the place was hot. The conductor of the 433 Express was a duke. There wasn't a passenger conductor on the line below the degree of Earl. They were good men, every one, but they had 2 defects which I couldn't cure, and so had to wink at. They wouldn't lay aside their armor, and they would knock down rob the company. There was hardly a knight in all the land who wasn't in some useful employment. They were going from end to end on the country in all manner of useful missionary capacities. Their penchant for wandering and their experience in it made them altogether the most effective spreaders of civilization we had. They went clothed in steel and equipped with sword and lance with battle axe, and they couldn't persuade a person to try a sewing machine on the installment plan, or a melodeon, or a barbed wire fence, or a prohibition joint, or any of the other 1,001 things they canvassed for. They removed him and passed on. I was very happy. Things were working steadily towards a secretly long 4-point. You see, I had 2 schemes in my head which were the vastest of all my projects. The one was to overthrow the Catholic Church and set up the Protestant faith on its ruins. Not as an established church, but as a go as he pleased me. And the other project was to get a decree issued by and by commanding that upon Arthur's death, unlimited suffrage should be introduced, and given to men and women alike. At any rate, to all men, wise or unwise, and all mothers who at middle age should be found to snore nearly as much as their sons at 21. Arthur was good for 30 years yet. He being about my own age, that is to say 40, and I believe that in the time I could easily have the active part of the population of that day ready and eager for an event which should be the first of its kind in the history of the world. A rounded and complete governmental revolution without bloodshed. The result to be a republic. Well, I may as well confess, though I do feel ashamed when I think of it. I was beginning to have a base hankering to be its first president myself. Yes, there was more or less human nature in me. I found that out. Clarence was with me as concerned the revolution, but in a modified way his idea was a republic, without privileged orders but with a hereditary royal family at the head of it instead of an elective chief magistrate. He believes that no nation that had ever known the joy of worshiping a royal family could ever be robbed of it and not fade away and die of melancholy. I urged that kings were dangerous. He said, then have cats. He was sure that a royal family of cats would answer every purpose. They would be as useful as any other royal family. They would know as much. They would have the same virtues and the same treacheries and the same disposition to get up shindies with other royal cats. They would be laughably vain and absurd and never know it. They would be wholly inexpensive. Finally, they would have a divine right as any other royal house, and Tom 7 or Tom 9 or Tom 11 or Tom 9. Hold on, Tom 14. By the grace of God King, would sound as well as it would when applied to the ordinary royal tomcat with tights on. And as a rule, said he in this neat modern English, the character of this cat would contribute like the character of the average king, and this would be an immense moral advantage to the nation. For the reason that a nation always models laws after its monarchs, the worship of royalty being founded on unreason, these graceful and harmless cats would easily become as sacred as any other royalties, and indeed more so, because it would presently be noticed that they hanged nobody, beheaded nobody, imprisoned nobody, inflicted no cruelties or injustice of any sort. And so must be worthy of a deeper love and reverence than the customary human king, and would certainly get it. The eyes of the whole carried world would soon be fixed upon this humane and gentle system, and royal butchers would presently begin to disappear. The subject would fill the vacancy of catlings from our own royal house. We should become a factory. We should supply the thrones of the world. Within 40 years, all Europe would be governed by cats, and we should furnish the cats. The reign of universal peace would begin then, to end no more forever. Meow, wow, wow, wow. Hang him! I suppose he was in earnest, and was beginning to be persuaded by him, until he exploded that cat howl and startled me almost out of my clothes. But he never could be me in earnest, and he didn't know what it was. He had pictured a distinct and perfectly rational and peaceful improvement upon constitutional monarchy, but he was too feather-headed to know or care anything about it. Either I was going to give him a scolding, but Sandy came flying in. At that moment wild with terror, and so choked with sobs, that for a minute she could not get her voice. I ran and took her in my arms, and lavished caresses upon her, and said, beseechingly, "Speak, darling, speak. What is it?" Her head fell limp upon my bosom, and she gasped, almost inaudibly, "Hello, Contro. Hello, Central." "Quick," I shouted to Clarence. "Telephone the king's homeopath to come." In 2 minutes I was kneeling by the child's crib, and Sandy was dispatching servants here, there, and everywhere all over the palace. I took in the situation almost at a glance. Membranous croup. I bent down and whispered, "Wake up, sweetheart. Hello, Central." She opened her soft eyes languidly and made out to say, "Papa." That was a comfort. She was far from dead yet. I sent for preparations of the sulphur, and I rasped out the croup kettle myself, for I don't sit down and wait for doctors when Sandy or the child is sick. I knew how to nurse both of them, and had experience. This little chap had lived in my arms a good part of its small life, and often I could soothe away its troubles and get it to laugh through the tear dews on its eyelashes when even its mother couldn't. Sir Lancelot in the His armor came striding along the great hall, now on his way to the stock board. He was president of the stock board, and occupied the Siege Perilous, which he had bought of Sir Galahad, for the stock board consisted of the Knights of the Round Table, and they used the Round Table for business purposes now. Seats at it were worth, well, you would never believe the figure, so it is no use to state it. Sir Launcelot was a bear, and he had put up a corner in one of the new lines, and was just getting ready to squeeze the shorts today. But what of that? He was the same old Lancelot, and when he glanced in as he was passing the door and found out that his pet was sick, that was enough for him. Bulls and bears might fight it, but their own way for all of him. He would come right in here and stand by little Hello Central for all he was worth. And that was what he did. He shied his helmet into the corner, and in half a minute he had a new wick in the alcohol lamp and was firing up the croup kettle. By this time, Sandy had built a blanket canopy over the crib, and everything was ready. Sir Lancelot got up his sleeve. He and I loaded up the kettle with unslaked lime and carblic acid with a touch of lactic acid added thereto. Then filled the thing up with water and served it pristine spout over the canopy. Everything was ship-shape now, and we sat down on either side of the crib to stand our watch. Sandy was so grateful and so comforted that she charged a couple of churchwardens with willow bark and some tobacco for us, and told us to smoke as much as we pleased. It couldn't get under the canopy, and she was used to smoke, being the first lady and in the land who had never seen a cloud blown. Well, there couldn't be a more contented and comfortable sight than Sir Lancelot in his noble armor sitting in gracious serenity at the end of a yard, or a snowy churchwarden. He was a beautiful man, a lovely man, and was just intended to make a wife and children happy. But, of course, Jennifer, however, it's no use to cry. However, what's done can't be helped. Well, he stood watch and watch with me, right straight through for 3 days and nights, till the child was out of danger. Then he took her up in great arms and kissed her with his plumes falling about her golden head. Then laid her softly in Sandy's lap again, and took his stately way down the vast hall between the ranks of admiring men at arms and menage, until disappeared. And no instinct warned me that I should never look upon him again in this world. A world of heartbreak it is. The doctor said we must take the child away, if we would coax her back to health and strength again, and she must have sea air. And so we took a man of war and a fleet of 216 persons and went cruising about, and after a fortnight of this we stepped ashore on the French coast. And the doctors thought it would be a good idea to make something of a stay there. The little king of that region offered us his hospitality, and we were glad to accept. If he had had as many conveniences as he lacked, we should have been plenty comfortable enough. Even as it was, we made out very well in his queer old castle by the help of comforts and luxuries from the ship. At the end of a month I sent the vessel home for fresh supplies and for news. We expected her back in 3 or 4 days. She would bring me along with other news, the result of a certain experiment which I had been starting. It was a project of mine to replace the tournament with something which might furnish an escape for the extra steam of the chivalry, keep those bucks entertained and out of mischief, and at that same time preserve the best thing in them, which was their hearty spirit of emulation. I had had a choice band of them in private training for some time, and the date was now arriving for their first public effort. This experiment was baseball, in order to give the thing bold from the start and place it out of the reach of criticism. I chose my 9 by rank, not capacity. But there wasn't a knight in either team who wasn't a scepter, sovereign. As for material of this sort, there was a glut of it, always around Arthur. You couldn't throw a brick in any direction and not cripple a king. Of course, I couldn't get these people to leave off their armor. They wouldn't do that when they bathed. They consented to differentiate the armor so that a body could tell one team from the other, but that was the most they would do. So one of the teams wore chainmail ulsters, and the other wore plate armor made of my new Bessemer steel. Their practice in the field was the most fantastic thing I ever saw. Being ball-proof, they never skipped out of the way, but stood still and took the result. When a Bessemer was at the bat and the ball hit him, it would bound 150 yards sometimes. And when a man was running and threw himself on his stomach to slide to his base, it was like an ironclad coming into port. At first, I appointed men of no rank to act as umpires, but I had to discontinue that. These people were no easier to please than other nines. The umpire's first decision was usually his last. They broke him in the two with a bat, and his friends toted him home in a shutter. When it was noticed that no umpire ever survived a game, umpiring got to be unpopular. So I was obliged to appoint something whose rank and lofty position under the government would protect him. Here are the names of the lines. King Arthur, King Lothian, King. Umpire, Clarence. The first public game would certainly draw 50,000 people, and for solid fun would be worth going around the world to see. Everything would be favorable. It was balmy and beautiful spring weather now, and the nature was all tailored out in her new clothes.
Damn, that sounds weird.
I am the master here. Don't speak ill of the undead. You get used to the smell.